Our railways are in a mess. Private finance hasn't worked. Nationalising them hasn't worked either. The trains and the track are old and decrepit. Sound familiar? Well, this isn't now. This was 50 years ago, when decades of mismanagement and losses approaching the equivalent of £1 billion a year had brought the network to its knees. Something had to be done, and something had to be done quick, and it had to be drastic. So the government called in Dr. Richard Beeching, and what he did has made an effect that we still feel today. His vision for the future of British railways, as outlined in his infamous 1963 report, is quite possibly the most radical and controversial transport plan ever to become government policy. And even though the Midlands got off relatively lightly compared with many other parts of the country, the cuts were still devastating.
It wasn't just the railways that suffered, it was the local communities that were served by the railways, or indirectly the shopkeepers that were affected. Once the railways went, the staff went, the whole infrastructure started to collapse, especially around branch lines.
You just could not believe it. Anybody who knew about railways couldn't believe what they were doing. Even a main line was under threat and was closed, the Great Central, which was built to the Continental loading gauge. Today, you could have run trains straight through off the Channel Tunnel up to Sheffield.
And they closed it?
And they closed it.
Within 10 years of Dr. Beeching's report, 25% of our rail network would be shut down. This was over 4,000 miles of track, 3,000 stations, and around 200,000 jobs. And yes, you guessed it, mine as well.
We talk about the loss of jobs in the car industry that we've lost in this country and various, but nobody ever gave it a thought that in the 60s, thousands and thousands of railwaymen actually lost their jobs, and there was nothing ever really said about it at all. Not a thing. And these guys, it prematurely killed a lot of them. It really did, because it was their way of life and they couldn't cope with it.
It's perhaps not surprising then that for people of a certain age, Beeching is more often than not seen as a hate figure, a short-sighted businessman. A man that wielded the axe that chopped the railway up. But is that fair? Was he really an axeman, or was he a surgeon that actually wielded a scalpel? Well, it's been over 45 years since Beeching's report, and I think it's about time we reassessed his work. So I'm going to take a trip across the Midlands to find out what he got right and what he got wrong, in an attempt to discover what Beeching's real legacy is and what lessons we can learn for the future. It's a journey that will take us to the biggest rail freight depot in the country, which is just a stone's throw from the centre of Birmingham. To a state-of-the-art tramway system in Wolverhampton that carries over 5 million passengers a year on a route that was cut by Beeching. To Tamworth to see the final section of a £9 billion upgrade of the West Coast Main Line. And to the stunning St Pancras station in London to find out why the West Midlands is the frontrunner for Britain's next high-speed link. But we're going to begin here, in Worcestershire, at the beautiful Severn Valley Railway. The SVR, as its fans like to call it, was built between 1858 and 1862 and linked Hartlebury near Droitwich Spa with Shrewsbury, a distance of 40 miles. And although it was earmarked to close a few years before Beeching, it was typical of the type of rural line that he axed. Now the thing is, in truth, it never made any money. 100 years of running, but it never really made any money. And that's not just the Severn Valley line, there were literally hundreds of lines like this. It was said at the time that 30% of the rail network carried just 1% of passengers and freight. and that half of all stations contributed just 2% of the total income from stations. But the cold hard figures don't tell the whole story, because back then railway stations were at the very heart of rural communities, and everybody relied on trains for just about everything. So, Chris, you were actually born and brought up on a station very similar to this at Coleshill.
Yes, that's correct.
Now tell us about the freight, and because your dad was a station master, what sort of things were going on a daily basis?
Well, there would be coal going into the power stations. The farmers, local farmers, all had their grain, seed brought in, their potatoes, their equipment. There was 2 coal merchants which loaded out of the wagons and delivered the coal. There was a lorry that delivered the parcels. There was ice cream came to the local cinema. I mean, there was 2 clerks and a station master. There was 2 porters, 3 signalmen, a shunter, a guard, a foreman, and a foreman's assistant.
And then by the late 50s, 60s, of course, this all slowed down.
It had all virtually cut down to a very less and smaller percentage of staff.
So what did your dad think of this?
Well, his words were, without small streams, large rivers can't flow. So they wouldn't feed the passengers to the main stations. And it's the only time he ever voted Labour in his life, hoping to get rid of them.
Now, ironic was that it was the Labour government that closed it down.
And they carried on doing it.
You can't trust any of them.
No,
that's the answer. And the station at Coleshill was just one of many that closed across the region.
Well, you had lines from Old Hill across down to Halesowen and across to Longbridge over places like Darrydale Viaduct. There was a line that ran also from Old Hill across to Dudley called the Bumble Hole. Don't ask me how he got that name, but it was always called the Bumble Hole. Round Oak Steelworks, the traffic disappeared to these places. The blast furnace at Bilston, the work just disappeared.
But even as the axe fell, here at the Severn Valley, people were fighting to keep the line open. Not as part of the National Rail Network, that battle was lost, but as a private railway to save for future generations. A little piece of a disappearing world. Back in the 60s, this was a very brave move indeed.
We had quite a difficult time convincing anyone that the Severn Valley Railway was worth preserving. One commentator said pie in the sky, I remember was an expression used. But yes, it was hard work, and we had quite difficulty buying scrap steam locos off British Railways. They didn't really want to sell them to us, although buying the line was a little bit easier as long as we had the money.
So what was it that gave them the courage to go ahead with what seemed such an unfashionable idea?
Because we'd watched steam engines for many years from all sorts of locations. Lichfield and Tamworth were very popular, busy places to watch steam locomotives. And people like me thought how nice it would be to actually continue to watch steam locos, but the only way we could do it was by virtually buying our own train set, as you might say.
The real irony about this is, of course, this does make money. In fact, it makes lots of money. In fact, it's the most successful private railway probably in the world. And all because people care about it, love it, and work for it. And it gets better. Not only is the SVR a very successful tourist line, but apparently local shoppers are starting to use it too. So could we see perhaps one day it make a comeback and rejoin the National Rail Network? Well, I'm going to meet a man who should have the answer to that question. His name is John Hill, and what he doesn't know about the Severn Valley Railway isn't worth knowing. John, one of the things that's happening, which is different, I suppose, with the North York Moors and now the East Lancs, looking at actually running commuter services. What about that here?
We've been asked here, the roads in this area, Kidderminster and Starport and Bewdley, have reached almost saturation point. And there is no doubt there is a scope for running a commuter service. But who's going to do it? Is it going to be one of the private railway companies, or is it us? If we were asked to do it, we would be hard-pressed to find the men come to do the jobs. We exist, as you know, largely on volunteer labour. We would have to pay people if we started running a commuter service, and we really don't want to go down that avenue. But it's an interesting thought, and we'd like to have a look at it. For instance, there was an idea put forward by the local council, I believe, some weeks ago, about reopening the line from Starport to Hartlebury to run a commuter service from Starport to link up with the main line.
Who knows yet? We might see all them routes back to Gloucester.
It'd be nice to think of it. I mean, the railway lines, as you know, used to go through some of the most beautiful countryside ever, and it was only possible to see it from the train. You couldn't get to it by car. And of course, we have Beeching to thank for this, because if we hadn't have closed these lines, we wouldn't exist here.
The surprising thing is not that these lines in the end had to close. It's that they'd stayed open for so long, pretty much unchanged since Victorian times. Yes, they look pretty, like something out the railway, children, but remember, this was the 1960s. We were building nuclear power stations, putting men into space. Steam trains were dinosaurs and they'd outstayed their welcome. But bit by bit, a new slimmed-down network was beginning to take shape, and a small part of the bright future was built on the edge of New Street Station in Birmingham. Wood and brass were out, and concrete and plastic were in. So Beeching said we needed a modernised railway, and this is what a modernised railway is. In fact, this was opened in 1965, so Beeching would have seen this happening. This power box, it's a signal box, covers the whole of the Birmingham area. There are 17 men run this box, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That replaced over 300 men doing what these guys do. It's tough work because they've got to concentrate. But every signal, every platform, every piece of railway from Henley and Arden all the way through to Dudley Port, all covered. These guys see every train that's moving. And that's what a modern railway is. While Beeching was spot on about the need to invest in new technology, he didn't hit every nail on the head. And commuting was certainly one area where he missed the mark. He just didn't get it. He didn't like the way you had to staff and schedule around the morning and evening rush hour, or that commuters demanded regular stops close to where they lived. What he wanted was a stripped-down railway, where traffic was mostly limited to fast, efficient intercity trains and freight. Beeching's view was that families would want to own a car, or you'd catch a bus to work. He didn't see that it was railways' job to actually get you to commute. This was a commonly held view at the time. The M6 and the M1 had just been built, and Birmingham was being remodelled around the car, so commuting by rail, well, certainly outside London, seemed old-fashioned and unnecessary. So while there was a lot of hostility from the unions and people living in the country, the national press, and it has to be said a lot of the West Midlands car workers, were broadly in favour of Beeching's commuter cuts. Of course, here we are in the late 2008, and what he didn't see was that petrol would be over £5 a gallon, that most families in Britain would own 2 cars, and the roads would be totally congested. So in many places there's mounting pressure to reopen some of the old Beeching lines. One great example of a service that was axed by Beeching and has since reopened is the Midland Metro. This once failing route began running again in 1999 and now carries over 5 million passengers a year on state-of-the-art electric trams. But even though most of the land for the route was owned by the local authorities, it still took 15 years to get going. Which just goes to show, if you want to back a project like this, you certainly need stamina. Now, Phil, I know that you dedicated a lot of your personal time, and you told me it's 15 years of your life went into this.
I did, yeah.
Try to explain to the people at home that nothing on the railway happens very quickly.
No.
And nothing happens easily.
No.
And most times when you want to improve the railway, the public are the ones that stop you.
Because there are people turn off and on to projects. You know, and we all have to face up to is big infrastructure projects takes time, it takes planning, it takes the manufacturing, then the construction period, and they will take time. And you have to live to that. We all want things immediately. You can't have it. The one thing I've found out is you've got a big infrastructure project you want to bring in, you need a champion.
Right.
And you need to have that champion be with you for a long, long time, through good times as well as bad.
And Phil thinks when it comes to planning large strategic projects like this, we can learn a lot from the French.
The communist transport minister, when we were going down, we were talking about the Channel Tunnel and go back a long way, Pete. He said, and a delegation I went to, he said, that's the trouble with you British. You want to consult. And I said, well, that's what we have to do. He said, but here in France, you don't talk to the frogs when you're draining the swamp. and it stuck in my mind since the 80s, that comment that was made. The point he was making was there are national projects that bring national benefits, and they will look after those national benefits. For us, we want to consult with everybody, and there's nothing wrong with consultation. But at the end of the day, we have to be in a world where we compete. And when we compete, we need the best technology. And this is one of the best technologies going. But 10 years on, the local authorities are still not been able to find an extension.
He'll do me. You thought I was outrageous. It's fantastic. Today, the Midland Metro runs every 7 minutes from the centre of Wolverhampton via West Bromwich and Wednesbury to Birmingham Snow Hill Station and back again, on what was once the Great Western Railway. So let's come back to Beeching. Was he right? Was he wrong?
I think there are people for the age. There will be lots of people that say he was wrong, but in this particular instance, I mean, Wolverhampton and Birmingham have got a 7-minute service, much more frequent than ever was during Beeching's days. You will make the point whether he's right or he was wrong, but for me, without that rail track formation, we wouldn't be able to even argue about the future of the Metro.
Now you'd think that 5 million people can't be wrong, but even with our crowded roads, there are still many who believe that Beeching was right, that for most journeys the car is a better option. Well, let's have a look at two very different commuting experiences to see whether there's any truth in this view. We're going to put two Birmingham commuters head to head. Meet Amy Smith. She loves her car, thinks that public transport is for students and old people. Whereas Kate Anderson, well, she's a confirmed public transport fan. She doesn't own a car and hasn't passed her test. Both of them will be leaving Wolverhampton around now with the aim of meeting me in the centre of Birmingham in 35 minutes' time.
We've got about 35 minutes to get to Birmingham. We could do it easily as long as traffic lights stay on my side.
Okay, so I've got 5 minutes to wait for the tram, but I think by the time I get on there, plain sailing, that technically means Amy's beating me by 5 minutes so far.
That's Kate's tram. That's her tram right. The race is seriously on now.
Okay, so 5 minutes behind, but now's the time to start catching up.
I've actually had to not stop at one set of traffic lights just yet, so that's kind of in my favour, she says, until she has to stop. But hopefully once we get on the motorway, we'll be fine. It's fine, we're fine, we're making good time. We'll beat her.
So I think we're about halfway there now. I'm pretty sure that Amy isn't anywhere near halfway there. And I get a free paper as well, so I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the ride.
Right, we're just kind of heading through, coming out the other side of Wednesbury at the moment. And I'm not happy, because we're not doing too well. Not doing as well as I thought we would. We're about 22 minutes in now, and we've probably got at least another 13 minutes or so to go. And we've still got to face Birmingham traffic, so let's just hope she's delayed. Let's hope she's delayed.
Okay, so we're nearly there, and I'm having a bit of a feeling that I might win this one. It's been a bit of a plain run so far, and guaranteed Amy is stuck in traffic and she's going far.
Oh!
think we're just getting into Birmingham Snow Hill now, and I think I'll just beat Amy here, quietly confident.
Right now then, where's that Kate? Should be. Here she comes, look at that. Kate.
Hi Pete.
35 minutes.
35 minutes.
What can we say? How was it?
It was perfectly fine, absolutely fine.
How much was the fare?
£2.50.
Many people on?
Not really, it was nice and quiet, but lots of families just sitting there nice and quiet, you know, straight run, no
so
problems.
it's the tram for you?
The tram for me, all the way.
Fine, we're still waiting. And a good 10 minutes later, guess who turns up? Here she is. Amy, what can we say? Catch a tram. Now, the one thing that nearly everybody agrees with Beeching did get right was freight. He quite rightly saw that carrying anything was absolutely not possible. And he recommended bulk movement of freight. And today's freight is a success story. And here in Birmingham is the biggest success story of them all. Beeching was a big supporter of freight, and he was instrumental in the network adopting a modern container-based system. That allowed the easy movement of goods between lorries, trains and ships. And just a stone's throw from Birmingham city centre is the biggest rail container yard in the country. And it was built as a direct result of the Beeching report. Well, now this is an amazing sight. Just wagons as far as the eye can see.
Absolutely.
Tell me all about it.
Well, we've got a site here that's dealing with 650 containers a day, dealing with trains from the deep sea container port. And basically the goods that are travelling in here, the majority are coming in from the Far East. And if you went down the road to the Bull Ring and walked past any of those retailers, you'd be hard pressed to find one that hasn't got something that's coming in one of these containers.
Over the years, rail freight has had its ups and downs, but at the moment, like the rest of the rail industry, it appears to be on a roll. Although increasing demand causes its own problems, as there are only so many slots to go round.
If you want an example, Manchester, we used to have guaranteed 2 freight paths an hour from Manchester to our site off the West Coast Main Line into Trafford Park. They're saying that because of the new Virgin slots, we'll probably only get 1 an hour.
And that's the problem. We've got a quart. We're trying to get into a pint pot, you know, and we're never going to get the quart we all want. Finding extra capacity has always been an expensive business, which is one of the reasons why Beeching was so keen to cut the branch lines, to free up money to spend elsewhere. Of course, the politicians who implemented his report were keener on the cuts than they were on the investments. But it was an important part of his overall plan, and it's still true today as it was back then. Big projects cost big bucks. For example, the total cost of upgrading the West Coast Main Line will be about £9 billion. This stretch at Tamworth alone is costing upwards of £20 million a mile to turn 2 tracks into 4. Once it's finished, it will be the best track in Europe and will bring average journey times down by about 20%. Beeching would be proud. Nevertheless, there are people out there who believe we should go even further. Not just upgrading tracks, but laying new ones. For a new generation of high-speed super trains that could take you from Birmingham to London in just 45 minutes.
Well, I think Birmingham as a destination for the first bit of an unfolding network strategy for Britain's high-speed rail network is a very distinct possibility. It's in the right corridor, a very busy corridor, a corridor that's going to come under huge capacity pressure over the next 10 or 15 years. In the first instance, we think about faster journeys between the big cities, and that's primarily what it will achieve, also link airports. But one of the primary motivations for building high-speed rail is to get the fast non-stop trains off the existing main lines in Britain, and we can free up the tracks then for more local services, more regional services, and more rail freight. So in a sense, it's an investment that will allow the expansion right across the board.
But before we get carried away with the thought of Eurostar-style trains racing across the Midlands, there's one problem we need to address that even Beeching failed to sort out. That's New Street Station. Sometimes railways got it perfectly right, like putting the centre in a main town. And here's Birmingham, and Birmingham New Street is in the middle. What it didn't get right was it built two stations. This side was the London North Western, that side was the Midland. That is what officially is called a bottleneck, because this train coming out this tunnel here is on the London North Western side, but it can't get over there on the Midland side. It's impossible now for us to widen it and put points in to get all over the station, because you've got the rotunda here and the bull ring there. So what we're going to have to do, think creative, chaps. It's Borough Down. Chris, we're standing at Birmingham New Street. The future, what is there?
Well, I think the future here in Birmingham is very bright, with a £600 million redevelopment and also the reopening of more street platforms in 2010 and lots of new services and strengthened services.
For the people at home that can visit it, the idea is to punch a hole through so we get daylight, and ultimately there could be 3 levels of transport here in Birmingham.
The plan is to open up daylight into the main station concourse and through into the platforms down the new escalators, and we're also planning in the longer term for the possibility of an underground station here, whether it's for high speed or additional services.
Well, that's good to hear. I do hope this revamp ends up more than just a cosmetic exercise, because Birmingham deserves a world-class station, and that bottleneck has been a problem since I was a lad. So it's time someone sorted it out. Now for the final leg of my Beeching Odyssey, I'm going to head back to where we started, to the Severn Valley Railway. But there have been times over the last 30 years I've found it very difficult to defend Dr. Richard Beeching. But the truth is now history shows us that by the 1960s, 61, 62, Britain was in serious decline, not just the railways, but the whole fabric of the country. But now, here we are, we're opening railways, we're building new railways, and it almost seems as if nothing is impossible. But it all comes back to one thing: money. Do we do what Beeching did? Put our cash into a small number of large national projects to keep our main lines world class? Or would it be better to take that money and invest in local light rail services, which would make such a difference to so many people in the region? I admit it's not strictly either or, but believe me, the money for railways is always tight, and the choices are always tough. And it was an American politician, I think it was a president, in fact, that said, you can't please all the people all the time. And nothing's truer than on railways. Must catch this train, excuse me.
And we're taking one last journey down Beechings Tracks next Tuesday with science guru Adam Hart-Davis. Next tonight on BBC4, we're kicking off a very special music season for the festive period. Settle in for the original Sultans of Swing, starting with the incomparable Louis Armstrong. Next.
So much for our producer. What did he say?